Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping back, way back, into the lamplit, bustling, and subtly magical streets of Edo period Japan. Picture this: you're wandering, not through the glaring neon of modern Tokyo, but through a city of wood and paper, where the clip-clop of wooden Geta sandals on cobblestones is a constant rhythm. And the air is thick with the scent of grilling fish, sweet soy sauce, and the faint earthy aroma of tatami mats. Lanterns sway gently, casting dancing shadows on the paper. Shoji screens of tightly packed houses. It's a world away, isn't it? Honestly, with the, shall we say, enthusiastic approach to street food hygiene and the occasional samurai deciding to test his blade on a bamboo stalk, or less fortunately, something else, you probably wouldn't survive a week without a serious craving for modern plumbing and, well, not being accidentally involved in a highly honorable but decidedly fatal misunderstanding. It was a different time, with a different kind of magic. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support, even a quiet click in the night, means the world. And hey, if you're feeling chatty, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always a quiet thrill to see where everyone's drifting off from. Now, dim those lights, turn on a fan for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You find yourself drifting not on a cloud, but on the gentle current of a bustling Edo evening. The year is, well, let's not pin it down too precisely. Sometime in the heart of the Tokugawa shogunate, perhaps the early 18th century, when Edo, now Tokyo, was already swelling into one of the largest cities on the planet. Imagine London or Paris of the time, but constructed almost entirely of wood, bamboo, and paper. A city that seemed to breathe with the seasons, vulnerable to fires, yes, but also imbued with a certain organic, transient beauty. This sprawling metropolis, the seat of the shogun's power, wasn't just a political hub. It was a vibrant cauldron of popular culture, a place where art and entertainment flourished among the common folk. The chonin, the merchants, artisans, and laborers who formed the backbone of this incredible city. You weave your way through a crowded market street. The air is a symphony of sounds, vendors hawking their wares in melodic cries, the sizzle of food on charcoal grills, the distant, haunting notes of a shakuhachi flute played by a wandering monk, the laughter of children, the murmur of 1,000 conversations. It's a lot to take in, this river of humanity. Towering kabuki theaters with their flamboyant banners promising tales of heroism and tragedy dominate certain districts. Elsewhere, you might hear the thunderous stomps of sumo wrestlers in training, or catch a glimpse of the intricately crafted puppets of a bunraku show, their silent gestures conveying surprisingly deep emotions. These are the grand entertainments, the big shows, but you're looking for something different, something more intimate, something born of the streets themselves. Then you hear it. Clack, 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 clack. A sharp, rhythmic sound cutting through the general hum. It's the sound of two wooden blocks, a yoshigi, being struck together. This is the signal, a call to gather. Your feet, seemingly of their own accord, follow the sound, drawing you towards a small clearing in the throng, perhaps near a temple wall or under the eaves of a large shop. There he is, the Gaito Kamishibai, the street corner Kamishibai storyteller. He's not what you might call a grand figure. Perhaps he's an older man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by sun and wind. each line telling its own silent story. He might be wearing simple, dark, homespun clothes, practical and well worn. There's no elaborate costume here, no fancy stage. His entire setup is wonderfully, ingeniously portable. He might have a wooden box, the butai or stage, carried on his back with a strap, or perhaps set upon a small, sturdy wooden stand he's just unfolded. Bicycles, you recall with a faint smile, are a much later invention. So this man relies on his own 2 feet or a simple handcart to move his theater from one neighborhood to the next. You get the sense he's walked countless miles through countless Edo afternoons, bringing his paper scroll magic to eager eyes. A small crowd is already forming, mostly children, their faces upturned, eyes wide with anticipation. Their parents, or perhaps older siblings, stand at the back, feigning casual interest but clearly just as captivated. Some drop a few small coins into a worn cotton bag the storyteller has laid out. You notice the children jostling for the best spots right at the front. They're like tiny, incredibly serious theater critics, ready to be transported. You almost expect one of them to adjust a pair of imaginary spectacles and make a pronouncement on the thematic resonance of pre-show candy distribution. The storyteller doesn't say much at first. He nods to the gathering, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He's a man of few words, it seems, saving his voice for the performance to come. This perhaps is part of that silent magic the title of our little journey tonight hinted at. The quiet dignity of the performer, the hushed expectation of the audience. He methodically arranges his butai, positioning it so everyone has a decent view. The wooden stage is small, perhaps only a foot or two wide, but it feels like a gateway to other worlds. It's beautifully simple, often unadorned, or perhaps with a few subtle carvings that have been smoothed by years of handling. Its main feature is a slot at the side through which the storyboards will be revealed one by one. Now the storyteller reaches into a bag or a small, well-loved wooden box he carries and produces candy. This is a crucial part of the Kamishibai tradition. He's not just a storyteller, he's a confectioner of sorts. He sells cheap, simple sweets, perhaps sticky mizwam, millet jelly on a stick, or little colored rice flour treats, or perhaps some kind of dried plum. The children, who have been patiently or not so patiently waiting, now clamor for their treats. It's not a high-pressure sales tactic, it's just part of the ritual, the price of admission to the world of imagination. And honestly, who could resist? You find yourself fumbling for a coin, exchanging it for a small, slightly misshapen piece of amber-colored candy. It's intensely sweet, sticking to your teeth, a taste of childhood in a bygone era. Holding your prize, you secure a spot a little further back, leaning against a wooden fence post, the rough texture a grounding contrast to the sugary treat dissolving on your tongue. The storyteller makes sure everyone who wants a sweet has one. There's a practical side to this, of course. This is how he makes his living, one tiny candy, one small coin at a time. It's a humble existence, but there's an undeniable artistry to his entire enterprise. It's a mainstream historical fact that Kamishibai performers were an integral part of community life in Japan, especially from the late 19th to the mid-20th century, but their roots, these street corner storytellers, go much further back, evolving from earlier forms of visual storytelling. They were the local news, the entertainment, the moral educators, all rolled into one. Trying to imagine a modern equivalent? Maybe a very dedicated and slightly underpaid solo street performer with a really, really good PowerPoint presentation and a candy side hustle. Doesn't quite capture the charm, does it? With the candy distributed, a different kind of hush falls over the little assembly. The storyteller carefully selects his first set of illustrated boards. These are not flimsy pieces of paper. They are thick cardstock, hand painted with bold, vibrant colors. The art style is direct, expressive, designed to be seen from a distance by a crowd. Think of it as a very analog, very charming ancestor to the comic book panel or the animated cell. Each card is a scene, a moment in the story. He clears his throat, a small, almost apologetic sound, and then he begins. His voice, when it finally comes, is surprisingly versatile. It can be the booming command of a fearsome samurai, the quavering plea of a damsel in distress, the cackling laughter of an oni demon, or the wise, gentle tones of an old monk. He doesn't just narrate, he becomes the characters. The first card is inserted into the butai. It might depict a lonely traveler on a mountain path, or a humble fisherman casting his net, or perhaps a mythical creature emerging from a misty lake. The storyteller sets the scene, his words painting pictures in the air that complement the image on the board. Then, with a practiced, rhythmic motion, he slides the card out, revealing the next one underneath. Shk. The sound is soft, a paper whisper, but it's filled with anticipation. What happens next? The transition is seamless, the movement of the cards like the turning of a giant, magical page. This is the paper scroll magic. Not a literal scroll, but the unfolding narrative, panel by panel, image by image, each reveal pulling you deeper into the tale. You lean in, captivated. The story tonight might be a classic folk tale, perhaps Momotaro, the peach boy on his way to fight ogres, or Urashima Taro, the fisherman who visits an undersea kingdom. Or it could be a ghost story, a tale of spirits and the supernatural, which were incredibly popular in Edo, Japan. The flickering lamplight from nearby stalls adds to the atmosphere, making the shadows in the illustrations seem deeper, the monsters more menacing, the heroes more valiant. You notice the storyteller's subtle use of silence. He'll pause just before a dramatic reveal, letting the tension build. He'll let an emotional image sit for a moment, allowing its impact to sink in before he continues speaking. His eyes flick across the audience, gauging their reactions, adjusting his pace, his tone. It's a dynamic performance, a conversation between storyteller, images, and audience. One rather quirky detail about some Kamishibai setups, particularly as they evolved, was the ingenuity of the butai itself. Some later, more elaborate stages, especially those mounted on bicycles in the 20th century, would have tiny hidden compartments. These weren't just for candy. Sometimes, a performer might keep a small bell, a whistle, or other simple sound-making devices to add extra dramatic flair. A sudden ding for a magical event, or a whoosh for a gust of wind. Imagine the surprise of a child hearing a perfectly timed, eerie whistle just as the ghost appears on the card. For our Edo period performer, such embellishments might be simpler. A change in his hayoshigi clapping pattern, a sharp intake of breath, or a guttural sound made with his own voice. It's all about maximizing the impact with minimal resources. You could try this at home, narrating a picture book with dramatic flair and homemade sound effects, but be warned, your family might look at you a bit strangely. Or they might love it, who knows? The stories themselves were often drawn from a vast pool of existing narratives. Buddhist parables, heroic legends, tales of clever animals, local ghost stories, even dramatized versions of recent events or scandals, though one had to be careful not to offend the authorities. Historians still debate whether the earliest narrative picture storytelling forms like eitoki, literally picture explaining, which often involved monks using hanging scrolls to illustrate Buddhist teachings, were the direct primary ancestor of Kamishibai, or if secular street performance traditions using images developed more independently and then perhaps merged or borrowed techniques over time. It's one of those fascinating chicken or egg discussions. Did the sacred slowly become secular entertainment? Or did the sacred simply adopt a popular existing method of storytelling for its own purposes? Perhaps, as is often the case with these cultural evolutions, it was a bit of both, a rich intermingling of traditions. Regardless of its precise origins, the Kamishibai in front of you is a masterclass in engaging an audience. The children are utterly still, their candy forgotten, their faces a mixture of awe, fear, and excitement. Even the adults are leaning in, their earlier pretense of nonchalance gone. The storyteller expertly builds suspense. He might end a particularly thrilling sequence with a cliffhanger. The hero surrounded, the ghost about to reveal its face, and then pause, looking at the crowd with a knowing glint in his eye. What happens next? His expression seems to say. Will our hero escape? Will the beautiful princess be saved? You realize you've been holding your breath. The simple sweetness of the candy has long faded, replaced by the more complex flavor of the unfolding drama. The sounds of the Edo street around you, the vendors, the footsteps, the distant music, have receded into a muted background hum. For these few precious minutes, this little patch of earth, illuminated by the storyteller's presence and the glow of his painted cards, is the entire world. He slides out another card. Shk. The story continues. The magic deepens. You see the skill in how the pictures are composed, often with a character on one side, and the next card revealing what they are looking at or reacting to. It's a very deliberate visual pacing. He might even engage the audience directly, asking a rhetorical question or encouraging them to call out a warning to the hero. It's interactive in its own low-tech way. You can't help but smile as a tiny girl next to you, no older than 5, whispers urgently, "Abunai! Watch out!" When the hero approaches a dark, ominous-looking cave in the illustration, the storyteller catches her eye and gives a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "Thank you, I'll let him know." It's these little moments, these fleeting connections that make the experience so rich. The shadows lengthen. The lanterns burn a little lower. The stories, though, seem to burn brighter in the gathering twilight. You've seen brave samurai, mischievous kappa, water spirits, wise old hermits, and perhaps even a glimpse of a dragon coiled around a mountaintop. Each character, each scene is brought to life by that one man and his stack of painted cards. It's easy to forget the simplicity of the medium, to get lost in the grandeur of the tales. You ponder how many children over the decades, even centuries, have sat just like this, spellbound. How many have had their first taste of narrative art, of heroism, of tragedy, of comedy, right here on a dusty street corner fueled by a penny's worth of candy? The current tale reaches its climax. A great battle, a clever trick, a heartfelt reunion. The storyteller's voice rises and falls, his wooden clappers emphasizing key moments. And then, with a final satisfying image, the story concludes. There's a collective sigh from the audience, a release of tension. Some children clap, a spontaneous burst of applause. The storyteller allows himself a genuine, warm smile this time. He bows slightly. He might then say, "That's all for this story. But perhaps one more, if you're good." A chorus of eager yes answers him. Or, if the hour is growing late, he might announce, with a hint of theatrical regret, that the show is over for today, but he will return tomorrow, with new tales, new adventures. This, of course, is often met with a chorus of groans and pleas for just one more. It's all part of the performance, this gentle tug-of-war between the storyteller and his devoted audience. He's like the original binge-watch series creator, always leaving them wanting more. You wouldn't be surprised if he invented the cliffhanger ending just to sell more candy the next day. Clever man. As the little crowd begins to disperse, some children still chattering excitedly about the stories, others already planning their return for the next day, you linger for a moment. You watch the Gaito Kamishibai carefully gather his storyboards, his precious tools of the trade. He stacks them neatly, perhaps tying them with a faded ribbon, or placing them back into their protective sleeve within his bow tie. He folds his stand, or shoulders his stage. The candy bag, hopefully a little heavier with coins, is tucked away. He's no longer the booming samurai or the cackling demon. He's once again the quiet, unassuming man, ready to melt back into the Edo night, perhaps heading home to a modest meal or to another street corner, where another small crowd might be waiting, eager for a story. The magic seems to recede with him, the air a little less charged, the street sounds a little more ordinary. But the images, the voices, the feeling of shared wonder, those linger with you. You carry them like a warm coal as you turn to continue your own journey through the darkening streets of old Edo, the taste of simple candy and epic tales still fresh in your mind. The city, for all its noise and clamor, feels a little quieter now, a little more thoughtful, as if it too has been listening to the stories. The memory of that first Kamishibai encounter lingers, warm and inviting, like the lingering scent of sweet soy from a nearby food stall. You find yourself seeking it out again, this gentle magic woven from paper and voice. Perhaps it's a few days later or a week. The vibrant, ever-moving tapestry of Edo continues its endless dance around you, a city of contrasts, as of exquisite artistry and earthy realities, of serene temples and boisterous marketplaces. You're learning its rhythms, the ebb and flow of its crowded laneways. And then you hear it again, that familiar clack, 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 clack of the Hayoshigi, your personal bat signal for impending stories. This time, perhaps you see the storyteller in a different light, not just as a performer, but as a craftsman, an entrepreneur of imagination. You might spot him earlier in the day, perhaps, not performing, but preparing. He could be sitting in a quiet corner of a park or by a willow-lined canal, carefully touching up the paint on one of his storyboards. His fingers, stained with ink and pigment, move with a focused delicacy. Each card is a small canvas, and he, its artist. Or perhaps he's not the artist himself. Many Kamishibai bought their story sets from publishers or specialized artists, particularly as the form became more commercialized. Even then, he'd be carefully reviewing the cards, planning his narration, rehearsing the voices, maybe even mending a torn edge with a bit of rice paste glue. It's a reminder that behind the seemingly effortless magic, there's diligent, often unseen labor. It's not like he can just download a new story pack with a click, is it? Each narrative is a physical, tangible thing, precious and handled with care. Finding the right spot, the nawaba or territory, is an art in itself. He needs visibility, a steady stream of potential audience members, but also a place where he won't obstruct traffic too much, or draw the ire of local shopkeepers or the ever-watchful city patrols. You might see him politely negotiating with another street vendor for a prime location, or patiently waiting for a sudden downpour to pass. His precious cards carefully bundled and protected under an oil paper umbrella, the bangasa. Imagine the frustration of a sudden gust of wind scattering your meticulously ordered story sequence down a muddy Edo street. The sheer panic. It's enough to make a modern presenter, worried about a projector bulb failing, feel a twinge of sympathetic anxiety. And then there's the competition. Kamishibai was popular, and popular things attract, well, more of the same. There might be another storyteller just a few streets over, perhaps with flashier cards or a louder voice. Our man relies on his skill, his unique repertoire, and the loyalty of his small but dedicated following. You don't see hecklers often. Public decorum in Edo, while boisterous at times, generally respected performers. But a crying baby, a barking dog, or the sudden clang of a nearby blacksmith's hammer are all part of the ambient soundtrack he must overcome or incorporate. His concentration is a palpable thing, a shield against the distractions of the world. Let's delve a little deeper into those story cards. The artistic style, as you observe more performances, becomes more apparent. It's generally characterized by bold outlines, clear and somewhat simplified figures, and expressive faces that can convey emotion, even from a distance. Think of it as a cousin to the famous ukiyo-e woodblock prints that were so popular in Edo. but adapted for sequential storytelling and street viewing. While some ukiyo-e were incredibly detailed and subtle, Kamishibai art needed to be immediately impactful. Colors were often vibrant, though sometimes limited by the cost and availability of pigments. You might notice a certain visual shorthand developing, specific ways of drawing a villain's sneer, a hero's noble brow, or the swirling chaos of a storm. It's a visual language understood by its audience. Some storytellers, particularly those with a flair for art, created their own original stories and illustrations, making their shows truly unique. Others might specialize in a particular genre, becoming known for their terrifying ghost stories or their hilarious animal fables. It makes you wonder if they ever had storyteller battles, like modern-day rap battles, but with more paper cuts and fewer swear words. Probably not, but the image is amusing. And here's a quirky sidebar detail for you. As Kamishibai became more established, the ecosystem around it grew. In later periods, particularly the early 20th century, there were actually Kamishibai rental shops. Imagine that! A storyteller who perhaps couldn't afford to buy many expensive hand-painted sets, or who simply wanted to vary their repertoire frequently, could go to one of these shops and rent a story, complete with illustrated cards and sometimes even a summary script, for a daily or weekly fee. It was like the blockbuster video of its day, but for analog, street corner epics. For our Edo period performer, such formalized rental systems might not be as widespread, but there was certainly a trade in story sets, with artists and writers producing them for sale. Some storytellers might also have secret marks or tiny, almost invisible notes on the backs of their cards, little cues for a specific voice, a sound effect, or a dramatic pause. Remember to cackle maniacally here, or pause for 3 heartbeats after the monster appears. Little professional secrets of the trade. Now let's think about the stories themselves and how they might have evolved. While classic folktales like Momotaro, the Peach Boy, or Kintaro, the Golden Boy, were perennial favorites, especially with children, Kamishibai wasn't static. It was a living art form reflecting the tastes and anxieties of its time. Just as today's streaming services constantly seek new content, Kamishibai storytellers needed to keep their audiences engaged. You might start to notice longer, more complex narratives, stories that unfold over several days or even weeks. The storyteller would end each session on a nail-biting cliffhanger, ensuring his audience and their candy money would return for the next installment. This was the birth of serialized drama, street style. The most famous example, the Golden Bat, Ogunbato, a skeletal superhero with a laugh that could curdle sake, emerged much later in the early 20th century and became a national sensation. But the concept of the continuing story, the desire to know what happens next, was undoubtedly alive and well in Edo. Imagine the discussions amongst the children. Do you think the brave samurai will escape the ninja ambush tomorrow? I bet he uses that secret sword technique. It was the original water cooler conversation, just without the water cooler, or the office. The themes would also broaden to reflect the vibrant, sometimes tumultuous, life of Edo. Stories about clever merchants outwitting greedy officials, tales of tragic love affairs, though the shogunate sometimes frowned upon and even banned stories glorifying lovers' suicides or shinju, as they were thought to encourage such acts, accounts of famous samurai duels, or even dramatized versions of recent fires, earthquakes, or other notable events. Kamishibai could function as a kind of informal news bulletin, a way for information, or at least entertaining versions of it, to spread through the city. This wasn't the official news, of course. That was often distributed through kawaraban, those rough, quickly printed woodblock broadsheets. But a clever Kamishibaya could take a sensational story from a kawaraban and spin it into a multi-part epic. Accuracy wasn't always the primary concern. Dramatic impact certainly was. Based on a true story? Mostly. He might have winked, if winking was a thing then. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact: the significant role Kamishibai played in fostering a love for narrative and visual literacy, even among those who were not fully literate in the traditional sense. In an era where formal education wasn't universal, Kamishibai offered a powerful and accessible form of storytelling. You didn't need to read complex characters to understand the triumph of good over evil, the sorrow of loss, or the thrill of adventure when it was vividly portrayed before your eyes and narrated with such passion. It helped develop imagination, an understanding of story structure, and an appreciation for art. It was, in its own way, an educational tool, wrapped in the sweet coating of entertainment. A spoonful of sugar or perhaps a sticky rice candy helps the story go down, as Mary Poppins might have sung, had she been an Edo period nanny with a penchant for street theater. Let's revisit that silent aspect mentioned in our title. Edo Japan's silent Kamishibai storytellers. As we've seen, the storytellers were far from silent in terms of narration, but the true silence might lie in several other places. It's in the storyteller's masterful use of the dramatic pause, that intake of breath just before the villain strikes, or the quiet moment after a profound revelation, allowing the image and its implication to fully permeate the audience's consciousness. It's in the almost reverent hush that falls over the crowd, children and adults alike, as they are drawn into the world of the story. The only sounds are the storyteller's voice, the shikai of the sliding cards, and perhaps the collective gasp or sigh of the audience. For those moments, the entire bustling city outside their small circle seems to fall silent, its cacophony held at bay by the power of a simple story. Furthermore, the pictures themselves are silent narrators. They carry so much of the narrative weight. A well-drawn expression, a dynamic posture, the symbolic use of color or shadow. These visual elements can communicate complex emotions and plot points with an immediacy that sometimes transcends words. The Kamishibai is a conductor, orchestrating the interplay between his words, the images, and the audience's imagination. His body language, too, plays a part. A subtle shift in posture, a pointed finger, a widening of the eyes. These physical cues enhance the storytelling, adding another layer of meaning without a single word being uttered. He's like a mime, an actor, and a narrator all in one, a true multimedia artist of his time, using the technology available: paper, paint, wood, and his own versatile voice. You might even say he's an early master of nonverbal communication, conveying a whole chapter with a single well-timed glance at a specific character on a card. This interplay between sound and silence, image and narration, points to the deeper psychological skill of the performer. The Kamishibai is, in a way, a practical psychologist. He learns to read his audience in an instant. Are they restless? He might inject more action or humor. Are they deeply engrossed? He can slow the pace, build the suspense. He knows which stories resonate with which crowds at which times of day. He understands the universal appeal of certain archetypes: the brave hero, the cunning trickster, the benevolent sage, the terrifying monster. He's tapping into fundamental human emotions and narrative structures. It's quite a sophisticated operation, all disguised as simple street entertainment. Some might say he's just a guy telling stories with pictures, but that's like saying a master chef is just a person heating up food. There's art, skill, and a deep understanding of the human heart involved. This leads to another area of discussion among scholars. Historians still debate the extent to which Kamishibai in the Edo period, and even later, was purely for entertainment versus being a vehicle for subtle social commentary or moral instruction. While many stories were straightforward adventures or folk tales, others could carry embedded messages. A tale about a corrupt merchant getting his comeuppance might offer a cathartic release for commoners who felt exploited. A story praising loyalty and filial piety could reinforce Confucian values favored by the shogunate. Conversely, some tales might subtly critique authority or highlight the plight of the poor, though direct criticism would have been dangerous. Was the storyteller a conscious agent of these messages, or simply a conduit for popular sentiments and traditional narratives that often contained such elements? It's likely a complex mix. Some storytellers might have chosen stories with particular moral lessons, perhaps influenced by their own beliefs or by what they perceived their audience needed or wanted to hear. Others might have just been focused on telling a cracking good yarn that would earn them enough for their next meal. It's tricky to gauge intent centuries later, but the potential for Kamishibai to be more than just fun is certainly there. It makes you look at the seemingly innocent story of a monkey outwitting a crab in a slightly different, more analytical light. Let's focus more on the sheer craft of the vocal performance and the use of those simple wooden clappers, the hyoshigi. The storyteller's voice is his primary instrument, and he plays it with astonishing range. One moment it's the high-pitched, innocent voice of a child. The next it's the gravelly growl of a mountain demon. He can shift from rapid-fire narration during a chase scene to a slow, deliberate whisper for a ghostly encounter. He doesn't just speak the lines, he embodies the characters, differentiating them through accent, pitch, and cadence. If you closed your eyes, you might think there were multiple actors involved, not just one man. This vocal agility is crucial for keeping the audience, especially the easily distracted children, hooked. It's a vocal marathon, performance after performance, day after day. You hope he has a good supply of soothing tea or honey lemon drops, Edo style, of course. And the hyoshigi, those two simple blocks of wood, usually oak or another hardwood, connected by a thin rope. They are far more than just a tool to announce his arrival. In the hands of a skilled Kamishibai, they become a percussion instrument, a sound effects machine. A sharp clack can signify a door slamming, a sword strike, or a sudden shock. A rapid rolling series of clacks might represent galloping horses, thunder, or rising tension. A softer, more spaced tapping could be footsteps approaching or the beating of a nervous heart. He uses them to punctuate his narration, to add rhythm and drama, to signal transitions between scenes, or to recapture wandering attention. It's a surprisingly versatile tool, and its distinctive sound became inextricably linked with the Kamishibai experience. The sound alone could evoke a whole world of stories. Consider the sheer challenge of this outdoor performance. He's competing with the myriad sounds of a bustling Edo street, the cries of other vendors, the rumble of cartwheels, the chatter of passers-by. He needs to project his voice without shouting, to maintain clarity and expressiveness. He needs to hold the attention of children who might have the attention span of a particularly energetic goldfish. He's battling the elements, the glaring sun, the biting winter wind, the ever-present threat of rain. And through it all, he must maintain the illusion, transport his audience to feudal battlefields, enchanted forests, or haunted temples. It's a testament to the power of human storytelling, this ability to create vivid, shared worlds with such beautifully simple means. There's a certain poignant solitude to the Kamishibai as well. He's a public figure for the duration of his performance, the center of a small, temporary community. But before and after, he's often a solitary individual, preparing his craft, traveling from place to place, his livelihood dependent on the whims of the crowd and the generosity of strangers. Yet from this solitude, he weaves these communal experiences, bringing people together even if only for a short while, to share in the universal human need for stories. You watch him now, perhaps finishing a particularly thrilling adventure story. The children are buzzing, acting out scenes, their faces alight. He has given them a gift, a little escape, a spark for their imaginations. And as he packs up his bow tie and his well-loved cards, you feel a sense of quiet admiration for this master of paper scroll magic, this silent weaver of audible dreams. The street seems a little emptier, as the sound of his retreating footsteps, or perhaps the gentle clack-clack of his hyoshigi as he seeks his next audience, fades into the vast, ever-unfolding story of Edo itself. You continue to observe this quiet corner of Edo life, drawn back to the Kamishibai storyteller not just for the tales themselves, but for the entire captivating ritual. You start to notice more about the man himself, or perhaps woman. For while less common, female Kamishibai, sometimes called Ona Gaito Kamishibaya did exist, bringing their own unique flair to the art. You see him not just as a performer, but as a thread in the complex social fabric of his neighborhood. He might not command the same respect as a wealthy merchant or a high ranking samurai, his social standing perhaps a bit ambiguous, floating somewhere in the bustling world of artisans and entertainers. Yet he is undeniably a fixture, a familiar and often beloved presence. You see the easy interactions he has with the locals, the shopkeeper who always saves him a cup of hot tea on a chilly day, the children who greet him with excited cries of Kamishibai Oji-san, Mr. Kamishibai-man. The old woman who nods approvingly from her doorway as he tells a particularly moral tale. He's part of their daily rhythm. His arrival signals a brief, welcome respite from chores, a moment of shared wonder for young and old. In a sprawling, often anonymous city like Edo, the Kamishibai storyteller helped to weave a sense of community, creating a temporary village square wherever he set up his small wooden stage. He knew the children by name, perhaps even their parents' little bits of local gossip, though he'd be far too discreet to ever weave that into his stories. Or would he? A subtle, disguised caricature of the grumpy fishmonger, as the villain in today's tale, might just earn him a knowing chuckle from the adults, and an extra dango skewer from a grateful rival. The economic reality of his life, you surmise, is a constant, gentle hum beneath the surface of his artistry. It's a precarious existence, relying on the fluctuating generosity of his audience and the whims of the weather. A week of solid rain could mean a very lean week indeed. A successful day might mean a few hundred mon, the small copper coins of the era, enough for a simple meal, some rice, perhaps a bit of fish or pickled vegetables, and a little left over for candy supplies or repairs to his boutai. You see him carefully counting his earnings at the end of a session, his expression unreadable. It's a life lived on the edge of uncertainty, yet he faces each day, each new audience, with a quiet dignity and an unwavering commitment to his craft. It makes you appreciate the sheer tenacity of artists and performers throughout history, driven by a need to create and share, often against considerable odds. He's not doing it for the fame or fortune, there's precious little of either in this line of work, but for something more intangible. The spark in a child's eyes, the shared laughter, the brief, powerful connection forged through story. And here's a quirky sidebar detail for you. The world of Kamishibai performers, like many specialized trades, likely had its own internal culture. One can imagine Kamishibai families, where the art of storytelling, perhaps even specific story sets and performance techniques, were passed down from parent to child. A son or daughter learning the vocal inflections, the timing for the card pulls, the secret to making the perfect, not too sticky mizwame candy, all at their father's or mother's knee. There might have been closely guarded territories too, certain street corners or neighborhoods considered the patch of a particular storyteller, with unwritten rules about who could perform where. Newcomers would have to find their own niche, or perhaps apprentice themselves to an established performer. And like any group of professionals, they probably had their own slang, their own in-jokes, their own ways of talking about their craft. Did you hear about Taro? His demon of Rashomon Gate is a real crowd puller, but his Hayoshigi technique is a bit sloppy. The kind of shop talk that happens in every profession, from samurai swordsmiths to, well, YouTube content creators. While the true golden age of Kamishibai, the one often written about with its bicycle-mounted stages and nationally famous stories like Golden Bat, blossomed in the Showa period of the 20th century, the roots you're witnessing in Edo are strong and deep. This art form has an incredible resilience. It endured through the relatively stable centuries of the Edo period and continued even as Japan began its rapid transformation during the Meiji Restoration in the latter half of the 19th century. New technologies would eventually arise. Magic lantern shows, then cinema, then radio, then television, each one seemingly posing an existential threat to this simple street theater. And yet, Kamishibai always found a way to adapt, to survive, to reinvent itself. During the late Edo period and the transition to Meiji, as society began to experience seismic shifts, Kamishibai themes might also have subtly changed. Alongside the timeless folk tales, stories reflecting the anxieties and hopes of a changing nation could have emerged. Perhaps tales of new inventions, though you'd have to imagine what new inventions looked like before electricity became widespread. A particularly efficient new pickle press, maybe? Stories of encounters with foreigners as Japan slowly opened up, or patriotic tales meant to instill a sense of national identity. The Kamishibaya, always sensitive to the pulse of his audience, would adapt his repertoire accordingly. It's like your favorite musician suddenly dropping a surprise concept album about the societal impact of slightly improved farming tools. Unexpected, but potentially fascinating, this adaptability touches upon a mainstream historical fact. Kamishibai, due to its informal nature and street corner presence, sometimes functioned as a relatively unregulated channel for information and even subtle satire. While official printing through woodblocks, kawaraban for news or books, was subject to censorship by the shogunate, a storyteller could, if he was brave or clever, communicate ideas or tell stories that might not pass the official censors. He could adjust his narration on the fly, add a knowing wink or an inflection that changed the meaning of a seemingly innocent tale. Of course, this was a risky business. If his commentary was deemed too critical or subversive, he could face serious trouble from the local authorities, ranging from a warning to being run out of the neighborhood or worse. So, any such commentary would have to be skillfully veiled, hidden within layers of allegory or humor. It was a delicate dance, entertaining the masses while navigating the often strict social and political controls of the time. You admire the quiet courage it might have taken. As the afternoon sun begins to dip lower, casting long, golden shadows across the narrow Edo streets, you find your Kamishibai performer starting his last story of the day. There's a different quality to the light now, softer, more melancholic. The crowd is a little smaller, perhaps, some of the younger children having already been called home for their evening meal. Those who remain seem to savor these final moments of magic. The storyteller, too, seems to relish this last performance. His voice is perhaps a little huskier after a long day of narrating, but no less expressive. He chooses a tale that is gentle, perhaps a little wistful, a story about the changing seasons, or a touching fable about kindness. The Hayoshigi clack with a softer, more measured rhythm. You are fully immersed, the world of painted cards and spoken words feeling more real than the bustling city around you. You can almost smell the pine needles in the illustrated forest. Feel the chill of the depicted winter snow. The sensory details he evokes are powerful. You think about the feel of those thick paperboard cards in his hands, smoothed by countless performances, each smudge or faded patch a testament to its journey. The faint, sweet smell of the candy that still seems to hang in the air, mingled with the dust of the street and the wood smoke from nearby homes. These are the anchors of the experience, grounding the fantastical tales in tangible sensations. There's a subtle feeling in the air, a sense of an era, while still vibrant, unknowingly poised on the cusp of change. Our storyteller, his audience, they live fully in their Edo world, unaware of the great steamships and foreign powers that will soon reshape their nation, unaware of the technologies that will one day make their form of entertainment seem quaintly archaic. For now, this is their world, and Kamishibai is a vital, living part of it. You feel a pang of nostalgia for a time you've only visited in your imagination, for the simplicity and directness of this art form. It's a reminder that every age has its own magic, its own ways of connecting and sharing wonder. Maybe future generations will look back at our digital entertainment with a similar sense of wistful curiosity. They just stared at glowing rectangles for hours? One might muse. How charmingly primitive. The story reaches its gentle conclusion. No dramatic cliffhangers this time, just a quiet resolution, a sense of peace. The hero finds his way home. the lost spirit finds its rest. The last card is shown, then slowly withdrawn. The storyteller bows a deeper, more lingering bow than before. A few coins clink into his bag. The small crowd murmurs its appreciation, then begins to drift away. Children rubbing sleepy eyes, adults with thoughtful expressions. The spell is broken, but its echoes remain. This is where our journey with the Kamishibai storyteller begins to transition, to soften. You watch him pack his bow tie for the final time today. Each movement is economical, practiced. The painted faces on his cards seem to smile faintly in the twilight as he carefully ties the bundle. He shoulders his load, gives a final nod to the now empty space where his audience stood, and turns to walk down the darkening street. The lanterns are being lit in earnest now, casting pools of warm orange light. His silhouette merges with the other shadows, the sound of his wooden clogs fading softly. The street settles into the deeper quiet of early evening. The air cools. Perhaps a temple bell tolls in the distance, its resonant hum vibrating through the wooden structures of the city. You feel your own eyelids growing heavy, the stories of the day replaying like gentle dreams behind them. The brave samurai, the mischievous fox spirit, the kind old woman by the mountain pass. They flicker and fade, their adventures now part of your own tapestry of memories. The city of Edo itself seems to be breathing deeply, settling down for the night. The energy of the day dissolves into a calm, expectant hush, waiting for the moon to take its watch. And as you stand there in the quiet heart of this imagined past, you feel the day's stimulation. The vibrant colors, the myriad sounds all begin to soften, to blur at the edges. The sharpness of the world recedes, replaced by a gentle, encompassing stillness. The need to analyze, to understand, to follow every detail begins to fade. There is only the soft echo of stories, the lingering warmth of a shared human experience, the gentle pull of encroaching slumber. The last echoes of the Hyoshigi have long since vanished, replaced by the subtle sounds of the Edo night, or perhaps by the gentle hum of the fan in your own room, by the quiet breathing that surrounds you now. The vivid images of painted heroes and mythical creatures begin to soften, their bold colors melting into the gentle, swirling patterns you see behind your eyelids. Allow the details to become less important, the narratives to untangle themselves into a comfortable, hazy feeling of peace. There are no more questions to ask, no more scenes to decipher. The storyteller has packed his stage, the children have all gone home to their futons, and the lanterns of Edo are casting their gentlest, most soporific glow. Feel the weight of your own body, comfortable and supported, sinking just a little deeper into your bed, your chair, wherever you find yourself resting. Let each breath be a soft wave, washing away any remaining tension, carrying you further into a state of profound relaxation. The stories have done their work. They have opened a door to another time, another place, and now they gently guide you towards the quiet realm of sleep. There is nothing left to do but to drift, to float, to let go. Hey everyone, tonight we're journeying back to a time of flickering gaslight, clattering horse-drawn carriages, and a peculiar kind of inventive spirit. We're heading to Victorian America, specifically the Gilded Age of the mid to late 19th century, a period brimming with groundbreaking inventions, industrial marvels, and some truly earnest attempts to bridge the gap between this world and the next with, of all things, technology. Imagine yourself stepping onto a cobblestone street, the air tasting faintly of coal smoke, horse manure, and the exciting metallic tang of new machinery. Elaborate Victorian townhouses rise on either side, their windows glowing invitingly, perhaps hinting at a cozy parlor scene. Or maybe something a little more spectral. Honestly, between the corsets that could rearrange your internal organs with ruthless efficiency, the popular medical cures involving impressive quantities of mercury or arsenic, and the general miasma of city air, you probably wouldn't survive a Victorian dinner party without needing a real spirit guide. Primarily to help you find the nearest well-ventilated exit and a 20th century doctor. So, before you get too comfortable in this surprisingly hazardous past, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your quiet click is like a friendly telegraph message from your corner of the world to mine. And speaking of your corner, if you're up for it, let us know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always a curious delight to see how far these little historical rambles travel. Now, dim those lights, turn on a fan for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You find yourself materializing not as a ghostly apparition just yet, but as a curious observer on the bustling streets of, let's say, Boston or perhaps Philadelphia in the 1870s. The air crackles with a strange mixture of progress and anxiety. New factories belch plumes of smoke, their rhythmic clanking a soundtrack to the era. Telegraph wires, a relatively recent marvel, crisscross the skies, humming with messages sent across vast distances at lightning speed. A miracle in its own right. The newspapers are filled with tales of astonishing inventions. The telephone is just around the corner. The phonograph will soon capture sound itself. It's an age of tangible wonders where the impossible seems to be becoming possible every single day. If human ingenuity can conquer distance and time with metal and electricity, some began to wonder, why can't it conquer the ultimate barrier, death itself? This ferment of technological advancement coincided with, and in many ways fueled, a massive cultural phenomenon known as spiritualism. This wasn't some fringe belief system tucked away in shadowy corners. It's a mainstream historical fact that spiritualism in the mid to late 19th century swept across America and Europe, attracting millions of followers. We're talking ordinary folks, educated elites, even a few notable scientists and inventors, all captivated by the idea that the spirits of the departed were not only present but also eager and able to communicate with the living. It's not hard to see the appeal. The American Civil War was a fresh, gaping wound in the national psyche, leaving hundreds of thousands of families grieving. Diseases like tuberculosis, cholera, and diphtheria were rampant, and child mortality rates were heartbreakingly high. In a world so full of loss, the promise of one more conversation, one more sign from a departed loved one, was an incredibly powerful solace. It's like today if you lost your phone with all your photos and someone offered you a slightly glitchy but occasionally functional app to retrieve just one more blurry picture of your cat. You'd probably try it, wouldn't you? You decide to delve deeper into this world. Perhaps you see a discreetly printed notice for a seance, or a friend, with a hushed and excited tone, invites you to their home for an evening of interdimensional communication. You find yourself in a dimly lit Victorian parlor. The air is heavy with anticipation, the scent of beeswax polish, old velvet, and perhaps a hint of lavender water from the lady of the house. Gas lamps are turned down low, casting long, dancing shadows that seem to animate the heavy brocade curtains and the stern-faced portraits on the walls. Around a substantial mahogany table, a group of respectable-looking men and women sit with hands linked, their faces earnest and hopeful. The star of the show, the medium, might be a pale, intense-looking woman, or perhaps a dapper gentleman with a mesmerizing gaze. Some mediums were genuine believers, others were skilled opportunists, and many likely fell somewhere in between, a blend of sincere desire and unconscious showmanship. It was a complicated business, this communing with the ether. The seance begins. A hush falls over the room, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall and the occasional nervous cough. The medium might enter a trance, their breathing becoming deep and rhythmic. Then the phenomena start. A series of distinct raps might echo from the table or the walls. One rap for no, three for yes, an alphabet called out until a message is painstakingly spelled. The table itself might tilt or levitate, seemingly of its own accord or with a little, shall we say, unseen assistance from a strategically placed foot or knee. Sometimes musical instruments kept in a spirit cabinet might play, or ghostly hands, often made of gauze and cleverly manipulated wires, might appear to touch the sitters. It was all deeply convincing to those who wanted to believe. And let's be honest, who wouldn't want to believe they could get a final comforting word from dear Aunt Mildred, even if it sounded suspiciously like it was coming from behind the curtain? The Fox sisters of Hydesville, New York, are often credited with igniting the spiritualist movement in 1848 with their claims of communicating with a spirit through rapping sounds. Their fame spread like wildfire, and soon, mediums and seances were commonplace across the nation. Now, this is where our story takes a particularly Victorian turn. This era wasn't just about belief, it was an age obsessed with invention, with mechanics, with apparatus. If spirits could exert physical force to tip tables or rap on walls, the thinking went, couldn't they be harnessed to operate a more sophisticated, more scientific mode of communication? The telegraph was the wonder technology of the day. Samuel Morse's invention had revolutionized long-distance communication, sending complex messages across continents through electrical impulses. So, the logical, if somewhat ambitious next step for some inventors was, why not a spirit telegraph? If spirits had something to say, surely they'd prefer the efficiency of tapping out a message on a dedicated machine rather than laboriously rapping out letters of the alphabet. It was about giving the dear departed an upgrade to their communication package, moving them from ghostly dial-up to something resembling spectral broadband. This is where you begin to encounter the earnest attempts at ghost-powered telegraphy. Inventors, both amateur and those with some genuine scientific or engineering background, started to dream up and in some cases actually build machines designed to be operated by spirits. These weren't just whimsical notions. Some of these devices were patented, written about in spiritualist journals, and demonstrated to eager believers. The designs were often wonderfully, fantastically complex, reflecting the Victorian love for intricate clockwork and gleaming brass. Imagine a device looking like a cross between a typewriter, a music box, and a very confused octopus, all intended to capture the faintest whisper from the beyond. One popular idea was that spirits, being ethereal, might interact more easily with delicate mechanisms, or perhaps with forces like electricity or magnetism, which were still poorly understood by the general public, and thus imbued with a certain mystique. Let's consider some of the quirky and imaginative devices that emerged from this period. While a direct ghost-powered telegraph that sent Morse code from the spirit world remained elusive, many contraptions aimed to facilitate clearer or more complex messages. You had spirit trumpets, often cone-shaped metal horns that were supposed to float around the seance room with ghostly voices, or perhaps the cleverly projected voice of the medium, emanating from them. There were various psychographs or spirit scopes, machines with dials, pointers, and letters of the alphabet. The idea was that a spirit could guide the pointer or cause letters to be indicated, spelling out messages more rapidly than simple table rapping. Some of these devices involved delicately balanced needles that would supposedly move in the presence of spiritual energy, or pendulums that would swing to indicate letters on a board. Think of them as spiritual Ouija boards with added Victorian engineering flair. More gears, more brass, more earnest complexity. One inventor, a Dr. Hare, even developed something called the spiritoscope, which involved a pointer moving over a disk of letters, supposedly activated by spirits influencing a ball suspended in water. The sheer ingenuity, even if a little misplaced, is quite something. You almost wish one of them had accidentally invented a decent coffee maker instead. That would have been a spirit lifter for sure. So, you venture into the workshop of one such hopeful inventor. Let's call him Mr. Ebenezer Cogsworth, a man with wild hair, ink-stained fingers, and a gleam in his eye that's part genius, part sheer obsessive hope. His workshop is a delightful chaos of wires, batteries, those early leaky voltaic piles might, brass gears, magnets, and half-finished contraptions covered in velvet cloth. He eagerly explains his latest invention, the etheric telegrapho-psychograph. It's a beautiful monstrosity of polished wood and intricate clockwork. There's a keyboard, not unlike a typewriter's, but each key is connected to a series of levers and delicate springs, which in turn are supposed to be sensitive enough for a spirit's touch. The output isn't a typed letter, but perhaps a bell that rings, or a pointer that moves to a letter on a large dial. Mr. Cogsworth explains his theory with passionate conviction. You see, he says, his voice hushed with reverence, the spirits possess a subtle electrical aura, an ectoplasmic energy. This machine is designed to channel that energy. Their faintest volition, their mere desire to communicate, will be amplified by these patent electromagnetic resonators, allowing them to depress the keys and spell out their celestial communiques. He might demonstrate by asking a spirit he believes to be present, perhaps his dear departed Aunt Clementine, who was apparently quite chatty in life and he hopes equally so in death, to press a key. Everyone leans in. The silence in the workshop is thick enough to spread on toast. A faint creak from the machine. A sigh of wind outside. But alas, Aunt Clementine remains stubbornly silent on the telegraphic front. Mr. Cogsworth sighs, adjusts a small brass screw, and says, the atmospheric conditions must not be quite right today. Or perhaps Aunt Clementine is otherwise engaged in the Summerlands. The earnestness is palpable, he truly believes. He's not trying to fool anyone. He's trying to build a bridge to the unseen, using the best tools and theories his era provides. The challenge, of course, was immense. How do you design an interface for a user who has no physical body? What kind of force can a spirit exert? Is it electrical, magnetic, purely mental? These were the questions these inventors grappled with, often with very little to go on beyond anecdotal seance accounts and their own fervent imaginations. They were, in a way, pioneers of a very unusual kind of user experience design, trying to create ghost-friendly technology. You have to admire their optimism, even if their engineering was occasionally, speculative. It's like trying to design a smartphone app for your goldfish. Noble goal, tricky execution. This entire fascinating, and sometimes baffling, intersection of technology, grief, and belief raises questions that are still pondered today. Historians and sociologists still debate whether the primary driver behind the widespread spiritualist movement and its rather eccentric technological offshoots was a genuine surge in religious feeling and a sincere search for comfort in an age of high mortality and rapid societal upheaval, or if it was more a complex cultural response to this very change. Was it for some a form of popular entertainment, a thrilling parlor game? Or perhaps even a subtle, almost unconscious challenge to the authority of established religions, offering a more direct, personal, and empirically provable connection to the divine or the afterlife? The truth, as always, is likely a messy, fascinating combination of all these factors. People are complex, and their reasons for believing or wanting to believe are rarely simple. As you leave Mr. Cogsworth's workshop, the gas lights on the street seem to flicker with a slightly more mysterious glow. The click-clack of your own shoes on the pavement sounds a bit like spirit rappings. The earnest attempts to contact the beyond through wires and gears might seem quaint, even comical from our modern perspective, cushioned by a century and a half of further scientific advancement. But the human longing that fueled these inventions, the desire for connection, for comfort, for one last word, that's a sentiment that transcends time, as potent and poignant today as it was in the gaslit parlors of Victorian America. The night is still young, and the spirits, whether they're on the telegraph lines or just in the hopeful hearts of the living, have many more stories to whisper. Your curiosity, now thoroughly piqued by Mr. Cogsworth's earnest endeavors and the general atmosphere of hopeful invention, draws you further into this peculiar intersection of science and spiritualism. You might find yourself poring over the pages of spiritualist journals, publications like the Banner of Light or the Religio-Philosophical Journal. Their columns filled with breathless accounts of new mediums, successful seances, and, most intriguingly, detailed descriptions of the latest mechanical contrivances designed to facilitate communication with the dearly departed. These articles are often penned with a fervent conviction, using a fascinating blend of theological reasoning and what to the Victorian ear sounded like cutting-edge scientific terminology. Words like etheric vibrations, psychic force, odyllic energy, and celestial telegraphy are sprinkled liberally, lending a veneer of empirical legitimacy to what often amounted to hopeful speculation. It's like reading a very enthusiastic, peer-reviewed paper on how to make friends with a unicorn using only a kazoo and positive affirmations. You might even attend a public lecture or a private salon hosted by a proponent of this new spiritual science. Imagine a grand, gas-lit lyceum hall or a plushly furnished drawing room filled with well-dressed ladies and gentlemen. Their faces a mixture of avid interest, cautious skepticism, and profound hope. On the dais, a charismatic speaker, perhaps a self-proclaimed professor of psychical research, or a reformed skeptic now fervently convinced, extols the virtues of a new spirit communication device. He might have charts and diagrams showcasing the intricate workings of his psychoelectric harmonograph, a machine he claims can directly transcribe spirit messages by attuning to their unique biospiritual frequencies. He speaks of rigorous experiments, of double-blind, though perhaps not quite so blind tests, and of the dawn of a new era where science will finally unlock the mysteries of the afterlife. It's important to remember that this wasn't solely the domain of the eccentric or the uneducated. Some individuals who were otherwise respected for their contributions to science, literature, or social reform found themselves drawn to spiritualism and its claims. While prominent figures like chemist William Crookes or biologist Alfred Russel Wallace, co-discoverer of natural selection, in England seriously investigated mediums and spiritual phenomena, often with mixed and hotly debated results. American intellectual circles also had their share of those intrigued by the possibility of scientifically proving an afterlife. Their involvement lent a certain credibility to the movement, even if their methods, viewed through a modern lens, seem remarkably susceptible to confirmation bias or outright trickery. They were attempting to apply the principles of empirical investigation to phenomena that, by their very nature, seem to resist easy quantification. It's like trying to weigh a dream or measure a memory with a ruler. The tools just weren't quite right for the job, but bless them for trying with such Victorian earnestness. One particularly quirky sidebar detail from this era is the sheer elaboration and sometimes comical ineffectiveness of the testing conditions proposed by investigators, or even by the inventors of these spirit machines themselves. To prevent fraud, a medium might be asked to operate a spirit telegraph while tied to a chair, or with their hands and feet held by skeptical committee members. Sometimes devices were placed in locked boxes or spirit cabinets, with the expectation that the spirits could manipulate them from within, unseen. Of course, such conditions often proved more a test of the medium's contortionist skills or their confederates' ingenuity than of any genuine spiritual intervention. You might also encounter a specialized jargon that developed around different spirit machines and their supposed modes of operation. One device might claim to work best with spirits on the alpha vibrational plane, while another required a specific telluric current to be flowing. It all sounded terribly scientific, even if no one was entirely sure what it meant. Trying to get customer support for one of these things must have been a nightmare. Have you tried realigning your ectoplasmic capacitor, madam? Driven by a desire to witness one of these marvels firsthand, you managed to secure an invitation to a private demonstration of what is rumored to be a significantly more advanced, perhaps even a working model of a spirit telegraph. The inventor, let's call her Mrs. Evangeline Thorne, is a formidable widow with a keen interest in both electrical engineering and ethereal entities. Her late husband, a renowned clockmaker, apparently left her not only a sizable fortune, but also a workshop filled with an astonishing array of gears, coils, and mysterious-looking components. Mrs. Thorne, you're told, has perfected a device she calls the resonator, which she believes can directly receive and transcribe messages from the spirit world without the need for a traditional medium's trance. The machine itself is the medium. You arrive at her elegant brownstone on a misty evening. The parlor is less seance gloomy, more like a serious laboratory, albeit one with velvet drapes and a rather fine collection of porcelain. In the center of the room on a heavy mahogany table sits the resonator. It is a truly impressive piece of Victorian craftsmanship and optimistic engineering. Imagine a device about the size of a small writing desk, constructed from polished brass and dark, gleaming mahogany. Intricate webs of silk-insulated copper wire snake between various components. There are rows of what look like oversized typewriter keys made of ivory, a series of glass tubes that glow with a faint, purplish light, perhaps early Geisler or Crookes tubes, adding that authentic late Victorian scientific ambiance, and a large circular glass plate under which a delicately balanced needle hovers over a ring of letters and numbers. A faint humming sound emanates from within its depths, a sound that could be either a sign of its sophisticated internal workings or simply a loose wire about to cause a minor electrical fire. You hope for the former. Mrs. Thorne herself, dressed in severe but expensive black bombazine, explains its operation with quiet confidence, her explanations punctuated by the click of her jet beads. The resonator, she explains, her voice resonating with conviction, is attuned to the subtle sympathetic vibrations that linger after corporeal dissolution. The spirit merely needs to focus its intent, its thought form, if you will, upon the desired alphabetical character. The corresponding key, sensitized by a unique combination of galvanic currents and animal magnetism, will then be depressed, and the message transcribed by this automated stylus onto the paper roll. She gestures to a small roll of paper, much like that in a modern adding machine, though infinitely more elegant. She claims her late husband, Algernon, is a frequent communicator and has helped her refine the device from the other side. You almost ask if he also helps with the dusting, but you manage to restrain yourself. This is serious business. The demonstration begins. Mrs. Thorne dims the gaslights. To reduce atmospheric interference, she murmurs. A select group of attendees, perhaps a skeptical journalist, a hopeful recent widower, and a stern-looking clergyman gather around. Mrs. Thorne sits before the resonator, closes her eyes for a moment in concentration, and then gently addresses the air. Algernon, my dear, are you with us this evening? We have guests who are eager to witness your correspondence. The room is silent save for the faint hum of the machine and the ticking of a mantel clock. Minutes stretch. The journalist taps his pen impatiently. The widower sighs. Just as you're beginning to think Algernon is indeed otherwise engaged, one of the ivory keys on the resonator gives a small, almost imperceptible twitch. Then another. Slowly, haltingly, the delicate needle on the glass plate begins to move, quivering over one letter, then another. The automated stylus on the paper roll jerks into life, scratching out a message. The tension in the room is thick enough to spread on a scone. Finally, the machine falls silent. Mrs. Thorne, with trembling hands, tears off the paper strip and reads, D-E-A-R-E-A-N-K-L-N-H-I-L-L-T-A-L-L-W-I-N-I-B Ratag Hamadalkuname Be Warad Sabo Warana Sapodai Bablosia Saiba Barfating Nen Dia Yad Tad H E S Ahod F A I T A E L E A Tarozabai B Hastera A Y. A collective gasp goes up. The widower clutches his heart. Remarkable, he breathes. Cousin Bartholomew, if he exists, will no doubt be thrilled. The journalist, however, raises an eyebrow. Mrs. Thorne, he asks, were you not just discussing your cousin Bartholomew's lost spectacles with your housekeeper this morning? Mrs. Thorne flushes slightly, but maintains her composure. The spirits work in mysterious ways, young man, she retorts, and they have an excellent ear for household matters, it seems. The messages received through such devices were often, shall we say, conveniently aligned with the thoughts, hopes, or recent conversations of those present. Confirmation bias was a powerful amplifier, and the human desire to find meaning, to connect the dots, often filled in the gaps left by these somewhat temperamental spectral communicators. Sometimes the messages were profound, full of comforting platitudes about the beauty of the afterlife. Other times they were frustratingly banal, like a ghostly wrong number, or advice that sounded suspiciously like something you'd read in a particularly dull self-help pamphlet. Be good. Seek truth. Remember to turn off the gas light in the hallway. Thanks, Spirit World. Duly noted. This public fascination with spirit communication, whether through mediums or machines, naturally attracted both fervent belief and considerable skepticism. Newspapers of the day, like Harper's Weekly or Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper, often featured articles and engravings depicting seances, spirit manifestations, and these newfangled psychic machines. Sometimes these were presented with wide-eyed wonder, other times with a distinct tone of wry amusement or outright debunking. It's another mainstream historical fact that numerous investigations were conducted by scientific committees and prominent individuals into the claims of spiritualism and the abilities of its mediums. Groups like the Sabert Commission at the University of Pennsylvania were established specifically to investigate such phenomena. More often than not, these committees, after painstaking and often frustrating investigations, would expose fraudulent techniques, discover hidden wires, or conclude that the observed phenomena could be explained by unconscious muscular action, suggestion, or outright trickery. Yet, for every medium exposed or every machine deemed ineffective, the core belief often remained unshaken for the faithful. They would argue that the conditions weren't right, that the skepticism of the investigators inhibited the spirits, or that while some mediums were frauds, others were genuine. The will to believe is a powerful force indeed. The idea of using technology to pierce the veil wasn't limited to just telegraphy. The Victorian era saw a blossoming of what could be called spiritual technologies. Spirit photography, popularized by figures like William H. Mumler in Boston, produced portraits that appeared to include the ghostly images of departed loved ones hovering beside the sitter. These were often achieved through clever double exposures, but for grieving families, they offered precious, tangible proof of an afterlife. There were also numerous devices designed to facilitate automatic writing, where a spirit would supposedly guide the hand of a medium to write messages. These ranged from simple planchette-like pointers, ancestors of the Ouija board pointer, to more complex contraptions with gears and levers designed to hold a pen and transcribe spirit dictation. Even slate writing, where messages would mysteriously appear on sealed slates, became a popular seance phenomenon, often involving fiendishly clever trick slates. It seems the Victorians had a deep-seated desire not just to communicate with spirits, but to document, categorize, and if possible, mechanize the entire process. If it exists, they seem to think we can build a machine for it, or at least a very handsome mahogany-encased machine with lots of impressive-looking brass bits. This brings us to a fascinating point of discussion among scholars today. Scholars continue to explore the complex relationship between the spiritualist movement's enthusiastic embrace of technology and its simultaneous, often vocal critique of the era's growing materialism. On the one hand, using machines to talk to spirits seemed to sanctify technology, to imbue it with a spiritual purpose beyond mere earthly profit or convenience. It suggested that science and spirituality were not necessarily opposed, but could, in fact, work hand in hand to unlock the deepest mysteries of existence. On the other hand, the very act of seeking proof of the soul, of an afterlife that transcended the purely physical, was a powerful counter-narrative to the perceived soullessness of industrial capitalism and scientific reductionism. Was it an attempt to spiritualize the machine or to mechanize the spirit? Or was it perhaps a uniquely Victorian attempt to have it both ways, to harness the power and prestige of modern science and technology to validate ancient spiritual longings? It's a delightful paradox, one that makes this era so endlessly intriguing. You can almost imagine an inventor late at night in his workshop, surrounded by coils of wire and half-eaten sandwiches, muttering, "If I can just get the ectoplasmic impedance right, I'll show them all." The soul is quantifiable, and it prefers to communicate via a well-oiled brass lever. The earnestness, the ambition, the sheer unadulterated hope of it all is something to behold, even as you gently chuckle at the more outlandish contraptions. The spirit world, it seemed, was about to get a significant technological upgrade, whether it was ready for it or not. You find yourself swept along by the current of this peculiar enthusiasm. It seems as though every other parlor in the city hosts a seance, and every third inventor with a shed full of spare clock parts is working on a new way to get a clear line to the dearly departed. Perhaps you attend a grand spiritualist exposition, or a congress of progressive thinkers held in a vast, echoing exhibition hall. Here, amidst displays of phrenological charts, homeopathic remedies, and pamphlets advocating for everything from vegetarianism to universal suffrage, are a dozen or more booths showcasing the latest in spectral communication technology. Inventors stand proudly beside their gleaming brass and mahogany contraptions, each one promising a clearer, more reliable connection to the spirit world than the last. There's Mr. Phineas T. Grimsby's ethereal resonoscope, guaranteed, he claims, to pick up even the faintest celestial whisper, and next to him, Miss Calliope Strange with her patent portable psychometric conveyancer, a smaller, more discreet device perhaps for the traveling spiritualist who needs to contact the beyond on the go. It's like a Victorian CES, Consumer Electronics Show, but instead of faster processors and bigger screens, they're promising better reception from Aunt Harriet. The commercialization of the movement is in full swing. Advertisements fill the pages of spiritualist papers and even some mainstream periodicals. Tired of faint wrappings and illegible slate messages? Try Dr. Thaddeus P. Farnsworth's Electric Spirit Telegraph. Clear, concise, and courteous communications from the other side. Batteries extra. You can buy ectoplasm-enhancing elixirs. Contents, mostly water and optimistic labeling. Specially magnetized seance tables guaranteed not to tip unless genuinely moved by a spirit or a well-placed knee. And even spirit world calling cards for your dearly departed to leave when they visit. The line between earnest belief, hopeful experimentation, and outright opportunistic hucksterism becomes increasingly, shall we say, ectoplasmically blurred. It's hard to tell if some of these entrepreneurs are trying to connect with the dead or just make a quick buck off the bereaved. Perhaps a bit of both. Even a huckster has to eat, and if he can do it while providing a sliver of comfort, however illusory, who are we to judge too harshly from our lofty future perch? Amidst this fervor, though, the challenges are mounting. More sophisticated debunkers emerge, individuals skilled in stage magic and illusion who can replicate most spiritualist phenomena under controlled conditions, often to the chagrin of believers. Figures like the magician Harry Houdini would later make a career of this, but even in the late 19th century, skeptical investigators were honing their methods. Internal schisms also begin to appear within the spiritualist movement itself. Some proponents argue for a more philosophical spiritualism, focusing on moral teachings and ethical living derived from supposed spirit communications, and they look askance at the bells, whistles, and floating trumpets of physical mediumship and its associated mechanical gadgetry. They feel all this talk of ectoplasm and electric spirits is a bit déclassé, a distraction from the loftier messages the spirits surely intend to impart. You can imagine the heated debates at their conventions. Resolved that direct voice phenomena are more spiritually edifying than messages received via a brass-bound psychograph. Discuss. And what about the quirky, almost comical etiquette that might have developed around these technologically assisted spirit communications? Were there unwritten rules? Did one address a spirit speaking through a machine with the same deference as one in a darkened seance room? Was it considered rude to interrupt a spirit mid-transmission, especially if the machine was prone to jamming? One can only imagine the awkwardness. Excuse me, great Uncle Mordecai, could you repeat that last bit about the missing inheritance? The etheric conductor seems to be a bit fuzzy this evening, or perhaps rival inventors would accuse each other of spirit interference or jamming ethereal frequencies. Professor Grimshaw's infernal electrospectroscope is clearly causing disruptions on the C-sharp astral plane. My spirit guide, Princess Littlefeather, can barely get a coherent syllable through. You can almost picture spirits queuing up in the ether, waiting for an open channel, perhaps getting a celestial busy signal, or being put on hold with particularly dreadful, ethereal muzak. Your call is important to the beyond. Please stay on the line. Estimated wait time, 3 earthly lifetimes. But as the 19th century draws to a close and the dawn of the 20th approaches, a slow change begins to permeate the atmosphere. The intense, almost feverish public fascination with these ghost-powered machines starts to wane. New scientific discoveries are capturing the public imagination. Roentgen's X-rays that can see through solid matter, the Becquerel's and Curie's work on radioactivity, the nascent field of psychology beginning to explore the hidden depths of the human mind. These new wonders offer alternative explanations for previously mysterious phenomena, or simply provide more tangible, more reliably astonishing marvels to contemplate. If you can see the bones inside your own hand with an X-ray machine, the thrill of a faintly glowing spirit trumpet might seem a little less electrifying. Crucially, these spirit communication devices, for all their intricate gearing and impressive nomenclature, consistently fail to produce consistently verifiable, non-trivial results that can withstand rigorous scrutiny. The messages are too often vague or personal in a way that suggests earthly knowledge, or simply, well, boring. Even the most ardent believer might find their patience wearing thin if, after countless hours and considerable expense invested in a celestial communicator, all dear Aunt Mildred ever manages to transmit is, "All is well here. Weather lovely. Wish you were here." Or, for the umpteenth time, "Tell Cousin Bartholomew his lost spectacles are still under the sofa in the library." There's only so much celestial small talk one can take. The spirits, it seems, are either remarkably unobservant about major cosmic truths, or have terrible conversational skills, or just possibly they aren't actually operating the machines at all. Furthermore, new forms of entertainment and communication are emerging, offering more reliable and often more spectacular wonders. The flickering images of early cinema, the increasing accessibility of the telephone for personal communication, the phonograph that can capture and reproduce voices and music as if by magic. These innovations provide very real, very tangible marvels that don't require a darkened room, a receptive medium, or a particularly well-calibrated ectoplasmic resonator. Why struggle to get a faint, misspelled message from the spirit of Napoleon via a clunky machine when you can go to a kinetoscope parlor and see a moving picture of a train appearing to rush right at you? The sheer, undeniable presence of these new technologies begins to make the ethereal promises of spirit telegraphy seem a bit like yesterday's news. This leads us to a mainstream historical fact. While organized spiritualism as a religion and philosophy continued well into the 20th century and exists even today, the specific craze for mechanical spirit communication devices, those earnest attempts at ghost-powered telegraphy, largely faded by the early 1900s. These intricate contraptions, once the cutting edge of psychical research, gradually became historical curiosities, relics of a bygone era of uniquely Victorian optimism and inventive eccentricity. The underlying human desire for contact with loved ones who have passed on, of course, remained as strong as ever. It simply found other outlets, other modes of expression, from the enduring popularity of the Ouija board to later, more technologically advanced forms of ghost hunting. So, what became of all those earnest inventors and their marvelous, if ultimately unsuccessful, machines? You can imagine Mr. Cogsworth a little older, perhaps a little wiser, quietly dismantling his etheric telegraphopsychograph, salvaging the brass gears and polished mahogany for some new, more earthly invention. Perhaps a particularly efficient mousetrap or an automated tea-stirring device. Mrs. Thorne's resonator might end up gathering dust in an attic, covered by a velvet sheet, a poignant monument to her inventive spirit and her conversations with Algernon. Some of these devices undoubtedly rusted away in forgotten sheds, while others, a lucky few, might have found their way into the collections of museums dedicated to scientific oddities or the history of spiritualism, where they now sit silently, their wires disconnected, their glowing tubes long since extinguished. They are testaments to a unique cultural moment, a time when it seemed perfectly reasonable to try and send a telegram to a ghost. You can almost hear the faint, ghostly chuckle of a long-departed skeptic. Told you it wouldn't work. Now about those spectacles. The legacy of these earnest attempts, however, is more than just a collection of quirky antiques. This period highlights that profound human desire for connection, for reassurance that death is not the absolute end. The Victorians, in their own unique way, tried to bridge that ultimate gap with the tools they understood best: science, mechanics, and an unwavering, often touching faith in progress. Their attempts to mechanize the mystical, to quantify the ethereal, speak volumes about their worldview, a fascinating blend of empirical curiosity and deep spiritual longing. It was an era that truly believed that if you built a better spirit trap, the ghosts would beat a path to your door. And this brings us to one final area of scholarly curiosity. Cultural historians and folklorists still analyze how the imagery, narratives, and sheer technological optimism generated by 19th century spiritualist endeavors, including these communication devices, might have subtly influenced the nascent genres of science fiction and fantasy literature. Did the idea of communicating across vast, unseen dimensions via strange machines plant seeds in the minds of early sci-fi writers? Did the descriptions of ectoplasmic forms and spirit manifestations find their way into the ghost stories and supernatural tales that were so popular in the Victorian and Edwardian eras? Some even suggest that the magical special effects and illusions of early cinema, designed to awe and mystify audiences, might have drawn some of its visual language from the theatricality and mechanical trickery of the seance room and the spirit tech demonstration. It's a subtle but intriguing thread to trace, how these earnest, sometimes misguided attempts to contact the other side might have inadvertently helped shape our imaginative landscapes. Now imagine yourself some years later, perhaps in the early years of a new century, wandering through a dusty, dimly lit antique shop, or a forgotten corner of a local historical society museum. Tucked away behind a stack of faded portraits and a moth-eaten bearskin rug, you spot it. A strange, silent contraption of brass and wood, with a tarnished keyboard and a tangle of disconnected wires. It's one of them, a relic of that bygone age of ghost-powered telegraphy. The earnestness of its creator, the hopes of those who once gathered around it, seem to cling to it like a faint perfume of lavender and old dreams. There's a profound sense of peace about it now. The frantic striving, the desperate hope, the heated debates, all have long since faded. It's no longer a tool for piercing the veil, but a quiet reminder of a time when humanity, in its grief and its relentless curiosity, reached for the stars or perhaps the spirits with whatever tools it could fashion. The flickering gaslight imagery, so vivid in your mind's eye throughout this journey, begins to soften. The light seems warmer now, more diffuse, like the gentle glow from a distant, slumbering city. The intricate whirring and clicking of those imaginary Victorian machines, once so full of promise and potential, now becomes a soothing, rhythmic hum, a lullaby of forgotten ingenuity. The earnest faces of the inventors, the hopeful expressions of the seance sitters, all begin to fade into a gentle, comfortable blur. The weight of their striving, their successes and failures, lifts, leaving only a sense of quiet wonder at the boundless human capacity for hope and imagination. The messages from the beyond, whether real or imagined, have all been delivered, or perhaps they were never meant to be fully understood, only to prompt the journey itself. And as these final images of a bygone era gently dissolve, as the last faint click of a spectral telegraph key fades into the silence, you feel a profound sense of calm descend. The busy, inventive, and slightly haunted world of Victorian America recedes, leaving behind only the gentle rhythmic pulse of your own quiet breathing. The earnest attempts, the intricate machines, the whispered messages in darkened rooms, all now become part of the soft, drifting landscape of approaching sleep. There is nothing left to investigate, no more spectral signals to decipher. The inventors have laid down their tools, the mediums have drawn their curtains, and the gaslights of the 19th century have dimmed into a soft, peaceful glow, much like the gentle darkness that now envelops you. Feel the day's thoughts and concerns loosen their grip, like old, tightly laced Victorian garments being comfortably unfastened. Allow your mind to drift from the specific details of history into a more diffuse, edgeless awareness, a comfortable state of simply being. Each breath is a soft sigh, releasing any lingering tension, any need to analyze or understand, carrying you smoothly and gently towards the restorative quiet of deep slumber. The past has whispered its strange and gentle stories, and now it bids you a peaceful rest. Good night.